All right, so our nation's top law enforcement officer was asked who in her department is responsible for releasing the names and sensitive photographs of survivors of crimes against children, while at the same time blacking out the names of their alleged abusers. And her answer was to call the Republican congressman who co-wrote the law requiring transparency, a guy with Trump derangement syndrome and a failed politician, which, with all due respect, is not a name, it's not an explanation, and it's definitely not accountability. So on Wednesday, February 11th, Attorney General Pam Bondi appeared before the House Judiciary Committee. That's the congressional committee that oversees the Department of Justice. And Republican Congressman Thomas Massie, one of the actual co-authors of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, used his 5 minutes to walk her step by step through 3 documents showing that her department released survivors' names while hiding the identities of people the FBI believes were involved, including billionaire Les Wexner, who the FBI itself labeled an accomplice in the trafficking of minors. Let's watch the video, and I will give you my take at the end.
Recognized.
May I respond very briefly to her statement?
Well, I think we can do that probably on one of our members' time.
Okay, thank you. I don't want that to get away. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Behind me, I have 3 documents from the DOJ production that are emblematic of the massive failure of the DOJ to comply with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. To my right is an email that was sent by the victims' lawyers to the DOJ. It was a list of names not to redact, a list of names not to release. What did the DOJ do with this email? They released this email in the document production. Literally the worst thing you could do to the survivors, you did. And they're getting phone calls. A lot of these people didn't want to be known. And we know you touched the document because you redacted one name and you redacted the lawyer's name, but you left the survivor's name there. The next document I want to show you, that was in the title, the victims' survivors' names, all right? The title of this one is Child Sex Trafficking, Co-conspirators, fully redacted. And by the way, I'm gonna unredact them here. Les Wexner is in this. Now your your deputy attorney general said, oh, well, he appears hundreds of times in the files, but he doesn't appear in this file until I forced you to release it, where he's listed as a co-conspirator, not to tax evasion, but to child sex trafficking, not to prostitution, not to money laundering, child sex trafficking. And then finally, what we have here is the third exhibit that I have is emblematic of the FD 302 release. These are the documents that we need that you're holding on to and over-redacting because they have the names of the men who are implicated. How do we know? Because the survivors gave testimony to the FBI, and it's in there. And what happens when you go to the portal at the DOJ to look at what's behind this redaction? Another redaction. So we can't even see them. And then there's some of these files you've pulled down from the website that we will never see because we can't search the redactions. So I have several questions for you. Who's responsible? Are you able to track who in your organization made this massive failure and released the victims' names? Are you able to track who it was that obscured Les Wexner's name as a co-conspirator in an FBI document? Do you have that kind of accountability?
I believe Wexner's name was listed more than 4,000 times.
Yeah, I already told you that. This is where he's listed as a co-conspirator.
Can I finish my answer? Come on, let me finish my answer. We corrected that within 40 minutes. He was already, you're acting like everybody's trying to cover up Wexner's name.
Reclaiming my time.
I'm going to answer this question.
Reclaiming my time.
Mr. Chairman. This is how this works.
Can I have my time back? Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady can give her answer. The time belongs to the gentleman from
Kentucky. All right, I'm reclaiming my time.
Can I give my answer?
So I'm going to put the language of the bill up on the screen.
Chairman, may I give my answer on that? It's a political joke, and I need to give my answer on that.
We'll let the Attorney General respond, and then the gentleman can move to his next question.
It's my time.
Within 40 minutes, you asked me a question. Within 40 minutes, Wexner's name was added back.
Within 40 minutes of me catching you red-handed.
There was one redaction out
Where
of
he's
over
listed as a co-conspirator.
4,700, and we invited you
Show the
in.
video.
This guy has Trump derangement syndrome. He needs to get, you're a failed politician.
Gentlemen,
You need to
I
get
want
on
you to
these
watch the video.
matters.
Mr. Chairman, please restore his time and remind the witness of the rules here.
There is no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals.
Is that your position as well?
My position is any victim who comes forward, of course, we would love to hear from them. 1-800-CALL-FBI. Did you ask Merrick Garland that the last 4 years? Did you talk about Epstein?
I am reclaiming my
the
time.
last
I'm
4
glad you're
years?
asking about Merrick Garland.
You don't get to reclaim
because
time
this
when
is
you don't-
bigger than
when you can't-
Watergate.
when I don't answer a question the way
This
you
goes
want.
over 4 administrations. You don't have to go back to Biden. Let's go back to Obama. Let's go back to George Bush. This cover-up spans decades, and you are responsible for this portion of it.
And that's
now,
where the
I want to
most
know at
transparent-
what point did the FBI and the DOJ decide that Les Wexner was not a co-conspirator? Because our Epstein Files Transparency Act requires you, please put it back on the screen, please, to release the internal decision about whether to prosecute him or not, and it's not in the files, and it's not in the files for any of these other men.
Time of the gentleman has
Which,
expired.
may she answer?
And he's a hypocrite because he voted against the ban that we were talking about on deep fake AI porn. Only 2 people voted against it, and you were one of them, hypocrite.
The gentleman's time has expired. She didn't answer the question.
Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman,
I would,
order.
Mr. Chairman, could she answer the question?
Chairman, I was wondering,
The gentlelady's allowed, the Attorney General's allowed to respond the way she wants to respond to any member's questions, Republican, Democrat.
All right, I have unanimous consent request.
Gentleman's recognized for a UC.
All right, this is an example. I'm submitting these 302 forms that are entirely redacted, even when you go to look at them.
Without objection.
I'm submitting a witness statement that implicates Les Wexner.
Without objection.
I'm submitting an article from the New York Times that the DOJ released nude photos and
Without objection.
identifiable pictures of the victims. I'm submitting a letter from AG Bondi to Kash Patel, imploring him to quit keeping the files when you found out that they were keeping files from you, because they're still redacting files that you.
Chairman, are we going to
Without
recess for votes?
Yes, we are.
I'm submitting for unanimous consent a document of 17 individuals who've resigned because of the Epstein files.
Without objection. Just want to check on how much time we have left in votes, but one thing I've learned here of late that they'll wait on us. How much time do we have? Oh, they just called. Okay. The chair now recognizes.
If you feel like you just watched the nation's top law enforcement officer come apart in real time when confronted with basic questions about crimes against children, that's because you did, and everything about it should deeply alarm you. Here's what she didn't tell you during that exchange. According to a Wall Street Journal review, at least 43 victims' full names were exposed in the DOJ's January release, including more than 24 who were minors when they were abused. Some names appeared over 100 times across the documents. Attorneys Brad Edwards and Brittany Henderson, who represent more than 200 survivors, had actually sent the DOJ a list of 350 victims' names on December 4th specifically, so they could be blacked out before the files went public. According to Edwards, the department failed to perform even a basic keyword search to check its own work. Those attorneys filed an emergency request with the court, calling this what, quote, may be the single most egregious, meaning the worst, violation of victim privacy in one day in United States history. The New York Times independently found dozens of intimate photographs that were never blacked out, some potentially showing minors, with their faces fully visible. Those images were only removed after the Times told the DOJ they were there. So just to keep score, the DOJ needed a newspaper to tell them they'd published explicit images of trafficking survivors online. Tremendous work. Now, about Les Wexner. Massie forced the DOJ to uncover Wexner's name on Monday, the day before this hearing, from a 2019 FBI internal document that listed him as an accomplice in the trafficking of minors. Not money laundering, not tax evasion, the trafficking of minors. According to NBC News, the newly released version of the 2019 document shows 8 people listed as accomplices, including 4 whose names are now visible: Wexner, the former CEO of Victoria's Secret; Leslie Groff, Epstein's longtime secretary; the late modeling agent Brunel; and Maxwell. 4 other names on the document are still hidden. According to the Harvard Crimson, a separate FBI email from July 2019 named Wexner as one of, quote, 10 accomplices the FBI wanted to track down, question, and force to testify before a grand jury. An August 2019 FBI email said there was, quote, limited evidence regarding Wexner's involvement, and that same day, the Bureau circulated the memo listing him as an accomplice. His lawyer said prosecutors told them in 2019 that Wexner was, quote, neither an accomplice nor a target in any respect. Which is interesting, because the FBI's own document says the opposite. And her response to all of this? She said they fixed the Wexner cover-up within 40 minutes. To which Massie correctly responded, within 40 minutes of him catching them. That distinction matters. It's the difference between we caught our mistake and we got caught. Those are not the same thing. Now, on to Kash Patel clip that Massie played during the hearing. Back in September 2025, FBI Director Patel told a Senate panel under oath that there was, quote, no credible information, none, that Epstein trafficked victims to anyone other than himself. That's a remarkable claim when your own agency's documents from 2019 list 8 accomplices under the heading Crimes Against Children. Massie challenged Patel on this directly at the time, noting that alleged victims gave FBI interviews detailing allegations against at least 20 men. Patel's response was that 3 different U.S. attorneys had looked at the evidence and found it lacking. But here's the thing. The transparency law requires the DOJ to release the internal decision about whether or not to prosecute these individuals. As Massie pointed out, that paperwork is not in the files, for any of them. So what's actually going on here? The DOJ had one job under this law: release the files, protect the victims. Instead, they did the exact opposite. They protected the powerful and exposed the vulnerable. And when a Republican congressman who literally wrote the law tried to hold the Attorney General accountable, her instinct wasn't to answer the question. It was to call him a guy with Trump derangement syndrome, which I should mention is an interesting insult to throw at a Republican who has been in Congress for 7 terms. And it becomes a lot less interesting and a lot more obvious when you learn that President Trump has endorsed Massie's Republican challenger, Ed Gallrein, a former Navy SEAL, while calling Massie a, quote, third-rate congressman and a, quote, weak and pathetic rhino, which stands for Republican in name only. According to CNN's reporting on that race, MAGA World has poured millions into supporting Gallrein, and Massie's allies argue this is, quote, an attempt to silence the president's remaining critics in Congress. So when she throws out Trump's exact language against the one Republican in that room asking hard questions about the Epstein files, you don't need to be a political scientist to figure out what that's about. That's not law enforcement. That's enforcement of a different kind. Here's the language you need. The Attorney General attacked the congressman who wrote the transparency law instead of answering why her department is hiding the accused and exposing their victims. That's the sentence. That's what happened. What does this really mean moving ahead? Looking at it personally, for the survivors who were brave enough to cooperate with the FBI, who testified against the most connected convicted trafficker in modern American history, their reward was having their names, photographs, and in some cases, banking information dumped onto the internet for anyone to find. According to a letter filed with federal judges, one woman said the release was, quote, life-threatening. Another said she'd gotten threats to her safety after 51 entries included her private banking information, forcing her to try to shut down her credit cards and accounts. Imagine cooperating with the government to help catch the people accused of these crimes, and the government repays you by putting your personal information out there for the world to see. That's what happened here. And according to AP reporting, when Democratic Representative Lou Correa asked the survivors in the hearing room to stand and raise their hand if they felt that the Department of Justice would support them, none raised their hand. 0. On a bigger level, this is what happens when the Department of Justice operates as a political weapon rather than a law enforcement agency. The message sent today was loud and clear. If you're a congressman who pushes for accountability, you get called names and your president endorses your opponent. If you're a billionaire listed as an accomplice in the trafficking of minors, the DOJ will helpfully hide your name for you until someone catches it. According to NBC News, There are still 4 hidden names on that accomplice list. We don't know who they are. And the DOJ isn't volunteering. What does this achieve? That's the question that keeps circling back. This administration promised to release the Epstein files. Trump literally signed the law in November. According to Fox News' own reporting, she said in a February 21st, 2025 interview that the Epstein client list was, quote, sitting on my desk right now to review. Then on July 7th, the DOJ released a memo saying they found, quote, no incriminating client list, directly contradicting her February statement. That announcement drew outrage from conservative figures. Commentator Liz Wheeler called it, quote, unforgivable behavior. The Hodgetwins called for Trump to fire her. This isn't about party politics. This is about the fact that the people in charge of the Epstein files seem far more interested in managing the political fallout than in actually pursuing justice for the victims sitting in that hearing room. She was relying on a binder of pre-written personal attacks against lawmakers, what reporters described as a burn book on Democrats, with assistants sitting behind her passing notes, telling her which page to turn to. That detail matters because it tells you the preparation wasn't about the Epstein files or the survivors. The preparation was about deflection. And when the tough questions came from a Republican she couldn't use the binder on, she improvised. And it went about as well as you'd expect from someone whose strategy for a hearing about crimes against children was to talk about the Dow Jones. Which, by the way, she actually did at one point during the hearing. She started ranting about how great the stock market is doing in order to try to dodge questions about accomplices. The stock market, during questions about trafficking survivors. Here's where we are at the moment. The Epstein Files Transparency Act required the DOJ to release all its Epstein-related records. According to CBS News, Massie, the Republican, and Khanna, the Democrat, who wrote this law together, say the DOJ has wrongly blacked out the names and emails of people connected to the case, including 6 men who could be implicated by what's in the files. There are still hidden names on the accomplice list. There are still FBI victim interview records that haven't been released. Wexner is scheduled to sit for questioning under oath before the House Oversight Committee next week. This has nothing to do with one party versus the other. Massie is a Republican. She is a Republican. Trump is a Republican. This is about whether the people charged with investigating an abuse network that spans 4 administrations are going to do their job, or whether they're going to spend their time calling the people demanding answers names that sound like they were generated by a MAGA Mad Libs. Because right now, the Attorney General of the United States has shown you, under oath, on camera, that when confronted with evidence that her department protected the accused and exposed victims, her first instinct was not to apologize, not to explain, not to promise accountability. It was to attack. And if you're wondering why the survivors in that room didn't raise their hands when asked if they trust the DOJ, I'd say the Attorney General answered that question herself. Turns out you don't even need to put metal in the microwave to cause a disaster. Sometimes the person running the kitchen does it for you. If you found this breakdown helpful, drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Make sure to like the video and click the bell icon so you don't miss the next update. Share this with anyone who needs to see what's really happening, and subscribe to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.